So not only are we trying to answer the question, what is a woman, but I think it's even her attitude. What is her attitude towards being a woman? Has she come to a place of accepting who she is?
Welcome to the Carla Rand Show, a weekly podcast designed to dig into the lives of everyday people. People who are making a positive impact, people who have risen above and overcome obstacles. Insights and stories from ordinary individuals who inspire us all towards the truly extraordinary. Here's your host.
Hey, it's Carla. I had such a good conversation with Sharon, and this was the second time that I interviewed Sharon Neufeld, and I asked her a whole bunch of questions because the first time I felt like we just kind of like opened the can of worms, and there was all these questions in my mind, and I've had a couple of conversations with her too where she's given me like counseling and help, and so helpful, and she just always points me back to Christ. She has such a vibrant faith. And so I was able to ask her questions. We talked about womanhood. We talked about what does it mean to be a woman? What is a woman anyways? We talked about like, how do we support teen girls who are struggling? Where do we find our, like when we feel empty as women, where do we find our source for filling that emptiness? Where do we get that from? And so our conversation was so helpful for me, and I believe it will be very helpful for you. So if you have questions about what is it like to be a woman, what about a little bit about the feminist movement? We touched on that just a little bit, and just like really finding ways so that women can know where their identity comes from, how are they defined, so that they don't have to keep fighting for those rights. So I had such a good conversation with her, and let's hear it now. So I have Sharon Neufeld on with me, and this is a really special podcast, you guys, because this is the first time I've ever had a guest come more than once. But Sharon, you answered so many good questions. We heard your story in episode 24. So if you want to hear more context to who Sharon Neufeld is, why do I have her on here again, go back to episode 24 and watch it. But today, I really want to talk about women. I want to talk about women's roles in the home, women's roles in society. I want to touch on a lot of things. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, so I really want to get right into it. But Sharon, first, I just want to thank you so much for coming back on the Carla Rand Show. Thank you so much for being willing to dive into this with me. Really appreciate it.
And Carla, let me just clarify something, because I think last time I left people saying I hadn't gone on for further education. And I just want to clarify that I did start my master's. I went on for further education, and I have received a couple of certificates in trauma-based story work. And so, and other counseling areas that I have done some further education in. So I just want to add that to
right.
The understanding that it's not that I haven't done any, but it came later.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I know like we've had a couple of conversations too that have been super helpful for me. So, I think it would be wonderful if you could go back into counseling and do more of that again, but that's just what I think. So I know you have a lot on your plate. You have a lot of opportunities coming up. So that's awesome. But let's get into women's roles right away. So first of all, just a little bit of context for those of you who haven't seen episode 24, Sharon Neufeld and her husband, Waldy, her husband was a president of Peace River Bible Institute for quite a few years, and just recently is no longer in that position, now looking for other things. And Sharon, you've been a support to him, but you've also been a teacher at that school, a professor at that school. You've been helping out in many areas with the marketing or whatever you want to call that. So really a lot of roles in your life. And when we talked last time, it kind of surprised me because I sort of thought like, okay, like there's Sharon Neufeld, she's this mom of 4 kids, right? 4 kids. Mm-hmm. And then you've got your husband there, and he's working, and he had to get his PhD, didn't he? Like he had to get his master's, his PhD, so that he could go and like be a professor and teach people. And you were supporting him in that role. But how are you supporting him? You were supporting him by working yourself in these different corporations. Right. So you've kind of experienced the whole gamut of a woman being in the workforce, a woman being at home with her kids, and kind of like everything in between. So I feel like, and not only that, but you have done a ton of research on the Bible. You have done a ton of research on like a woman, on family, on marriage, on what that looks like. So I feel like you, of all the people that I know, would be the most qualified to speak on this topic.
Well, you know what? We're going to give it a shot. I wouldn't say I'm the most qualified, but I've enjoyed the journey of study, probably because I needed to be able to have some answers too.
Right. And that's where I'm at too. I feel like I need some answers. So if nobody else benefits from this, I know I will. So let's get into it. So Sharon, let's just start with this question. Okay. So we talk about, a woman. What is a woman anyways? Like, what is a woman? Like there's a man, there's a woman. What is a woman? How would you kind of define that?
Even just saying that question, Carla, I have to chuckle because you can hear in the question the confusion.
Right.
What is a woman? anyway? And so there's this sense of confusion, and you can also just sense the tension rise in the room as to what kind of an answer is Sharon going to give,
Right.
right? Because there's individuals that are going to just come out of the chutes ready to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So really what I would like to kind of preface as we go into this is you have to look at what in your story and what in culture has shaped the way that you have viewed being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Because this contention of being a woman is from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that understanding is something that I think a woman needs to look at, but she needs to really say from her story, from the culture around her, how has that influenced her interpretation of her own value? Because really what we're trying to get to is a woman have more value? Is she a lesser species? You know, like there's all those things that come out with that question of what is a woman anyway? So not only are we trying to answer the question, what is a woman, but I think it's even her attitude. What is her attitude towards being a woman? Has she come to a place of accepting who she is? So it's, and it's not going to be so much what we do, but how we view ourselves will get reflected in how we conduct ourselves, and especially in relationship to other people. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, you know, that's why I think there's going to be some animosity. There could be some resistance as we get into what is a woman. Because if you go to just the dictionary to get a definition of a woman, you know what the answer is? An adult female person.
Right.
Okay, so not a lot of clarification. And if I went on and gave you more of their definition, I think some would be horrified. But if you go back then to the Bible, we would understand that we are a female made in the image of God, equal in essence, with a very distinct role that God has given us. So tremendous value is established right from the beginning as far as who we are as a woman. So whether we believe this or not, it's true about us, but I think it's what we've experienced, what we've observed that has kind of tainted and clouded our attitude towards being a woman and how we view it. So one of the things of a woman that if you look at from creation is the fact that we are relational beings. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that a man isn't relational, but it does mean that at the heart of a woman, relationships are going to be or should be important to her. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm going to come back to some questions that I think women need to be able to answer. And that is, do I understand that who I am as a woman is something that is intrinsic? It is something that is within me as a woman in the soul area. It's not just my physiological external appearance, but it's who I am internally. And so then it doesn't matter what shape I am. It doesn't matter how I look externally. It's what do I understand a woman to be inside of me as a person? And, what would it mean for me to embrace what God intended for me as a woman? To embrace relationships and to understand the part that I bring. Because, Carla, as soon as you understand that I am created in the image of God, and obviously then there was a place for me because God said it wasn't good for man to be alone. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then there's going to be something about you and I as a woman that we have the privilege of bringing a reflection of the character of God with us into our world.
Yeah, so if you don't understand as who you are as a woman, then how do you even do that? And I think that's such a problem in our culture. And I think men have a similar problem, absolutely. But I want to talk about women specifically today, because you have the women on one side, yeah, that I am woman, hear me roar, and then on the other side you have this, this woman that's just like, I don't want to, push myself on anybody. I want to just make sure that I'm submitting to my husband and that I'm doing all the homemaking things and that I'm not like getting out there almost to a fault, right? So it's like you have these two huge ends of the spectrum, and most of us fit somewhere in the middle
but it's just hard to know, where do you fit, like, on this spectrum, and should there even be a spectrum, and what's that look like, you know?
Yeah, oh, for sure. And, and unfortunately, from the things that we've experienced in life, those things have had a way, because we live in a fallen world.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have things that have happened to us that cloud even the uniqueness of each of us as women and the uniqueness that each woman brings. We've had things happen to us that has clouded, that uniqueness that God meant for us and intended for us to bring into our world and to come to our full potential. So we then add to it by our beliefs. So what do I believe about being a woman? And how do I feel towards that? Because then we, in the end, can become at war with God about how he created me and whether or not I think that I got the raw end of the deal or that it wasn't fair, right?
I used to feel that way very much, Sharon.
Absolutely.
You know, like, I got the raw end of the stick. Like, the guys have it easy, the girls have it hard. And probably the guys think the opposite, so whatever. But that's how if you grow up like that, that's important to know that, like, why did that happen, right?
Exactly. See, and looking at our stories to say, because I had the same thing. I had to really work through some of these things as to how I felt as being a woman, being feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And then whether or not a woman had any agency. Does a woman have agency? Does she have a voice? Can she speak up? Does she need to be contentious when she speaks up? Or does she know where her inner strength comes from as a woman so that she actually is able to bring a presence with her that brings really the presence of God, that has a really powerful influence and impact on the worlds around her. So I think that when a woman is looking at what does it mean for me to be a woman, she needs to be able to say, what has shaped my interior world? So when I'm talking about my interior world, I'm talking about my beliefs, the choices I've made as a result of those beliefs, and the attitudes that I carry in being a woman, okay? Because that's going to be very helpful for her to begin to understand then how she views herself as a woman. If you've had a very good role model, if you've had someone who has given you some really solid teaching and some mentoring, then you may have a fairly good perspective. But if you've had a very negative experience, then you can see where some women then right away are fighting. There's a huge resistance to anything to do with being a woman. Even the way they dress, the way they act, the way they talk, there can be real resistance based upon what they've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But when a woman comes to a place of understanding that she's created in the image of God and that she is the daughter of the King who highly values her and he's on her side, if you come to know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior and know that he is on your side and he's the one that defines you and gives you value, then you see she's got an agency about her that she can then, from that place, have great movement for good. Mm-hmm. Because that's the whole point. As a woman, life is not all about me, but it's about what can I bring that's unique about me to the world around me that needs me. So, but I need to know that internally rather than going out there and going, I need this and that's all about me. Mm-hmm. But if I know who I am, then that really brings a very different attitude in what the needs are out there, and to be able to say, how have I been uniquely designed to be able to meet and minister to people out there with what God has given me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to give you a couple of definitions or word pictures that Scripture has and see what you think.
Okay.
But they kind of help us understand being a woman. Okay. So in Isaiah, God says, can a mother forget a baby at her breast? Even if she can, he says, I won't forget you. Mm. So what's the word picture? What is he saying about being a woman with that kind of word picture? Mm-hmm. So, and then the same thing with Jesus in Matthew, I think it is, where he says, as a hen wants to gather her chicks under her wings, he longs to do that as well.
So that means that we have part of God's character right there.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the man wasn't going to be enough to really represent God.
Yeah.
And we have an opportunity to represent outside of God, some characteristics of God that's very unique to us. But if I want to be the man and rather than embrace and understand that God's on my side and he wants me to bring that part, then you see how much more satisfying and enriching our lives can be. So being a woman, then you can see where there's a sense of nourishment, where we are going to bring life when we come into a situation. And that bringing nourishment is not whether or not I ever have a baby at my breast, because some women will never have a baby. They'll never nurse a baby. So it's not about the literal nursing of a baby, but that sense of in relationships. So whether I'm a nurse, a lawyer, a cook, or whatever I am, do I bring that sense with me that I offer something of life to others? Is my life enriching in the way that I interact and care for others? So it's not just having babies and nursing them in my breast, but it's realizing, what does that person need and what has God given me that I can help them so that they can grow and have a greater and richer life. So, but that again requires a woman to really look at her internal world and what is her attitude about being a woman, so that she can kind of see, does it align with what Scripture and what God intended?
Yeah, because I mean, for me, like, I'm just going to talk about me so that, I think it'll be more interesting than me just saying, oh, what if this? So for me, for example, Sharon, I have, I have 6 kids. We have a farm. I've got I got to cook and clean and do all that kind of stuff. So I feel very torn, right? And that's partly why I wanted you to talk about this. I feel torn because I'm like, on one hand, I have this commitment to my family, but on the other hand, I have these, this following, this business, this, I guess, sort of ministry where there's a lot of these women and men, but mainly women, who I'm helping with their fitness, with their nutrition, and beyond that too. And so I want to help those people, but I also want to help my family. And so I feel torn. Like, what does that look like? Because if all I do, Sharon, is stay home, cook and clean, look after the kids, I will be busy. I will be busy enough. But now I have this other stuff that I need to do as well. So something has to go, right? So for me, it's like, okay, maybe I need to hire a housekeeper. Maybe I need to make my meals easier. Maybe I need to get the kids to help out. And I do all of those things to some degree. But should a woman just be at home with her family all the time? Should she homeschool her kids? And, should she be like when people say a homemaker, just like everything that the culture tells us that like a typical homemaker would be? Or can she go out of that and work and do other stuff, right? And that's where I think the tension is for a lot of women, because a lot of women, we are overwhelmed because we're trying to do the family thing. We have a job, we have, family, extended family, friends, whatever. It's a lot, right? So when people are trying to weed through that and figure out what's important, can you speak into that a little bit? Or yes. We can get to that later. But yeah, that's, I think, a big question in my mind. And I think a big question of a lot of the ladies that I talk to as well.
And you know what, Carla, a couple of projections from two sides of the coin, because you were asking about, is it a continuum or whatever?
Yeah.
On one side, you can have a Christian side, a very conservative Christian side that says a woman is to stay home, barefoot, pregnant type of thing. And I've faced both sides of that spectrum. And the other side is to reject that and to look down on it. And I feel like I have faced both sides. I remember working and supporting Waldy to go to school, the criticism I had, but I also know the criticism from a time when I was at home with our youngest when we were in North Carolina. And I remember going to the store one time, Carla. So I just want to say this: women can be extremely hard on women.
Yeah.
We are so competitive. And so I think we have to really watch. It's sometimes not the men as much as it is other women that we get our biggest resistance and struggle with. So I was in a store in North Carolina and I was going to the checkout line. I'm going to date myself when I say this, but I had written out a check. and the woman looks at me and she goes, "Do you have a work number?" She says, "You do work, don't you?" And so what she was saying was, work is not work unless you're getting paid for something outside of the home. Okay. So then flip now down the road, and I am now working out of the home, and Waldy is going to school, and it is necessary for me to work and take care of my home and all of that. And then I had women say, well, you guys don't trust God. If you trusted God, then you would be home with your kids and you wouldn't be out there in the work world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I face those too, Sharon, both sides of the spectrum. And I've been that person. I've been that person, homeschooling my kids and everything, and kind of looking at some people and be like, they're going a little too far that way, or yeah, it's a tough one. Anyways, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I take heart from even the Proverbs 31 woman. Mm-hmm. Okay. But one of the things I want to emphasize with the Proverbs 31 woman is that she's a woman of integrity. She knows who she is. That's key, Carla. Mm-hmm. Because if I don't know who I am, then I'm going to want to fight both women. The one that's saying, well, you work, don't you?
Right.
And the one that says, well, you don't have much faith. If you and your husband had faith, you wouldn't be out there working. Mm-hmm. See, both of those have the ability to create disequilibrium in me. If I don't have my value firmly established in Jesus Christ to know who I am. Jesus is our greatest example. In John 13:3 and following, he says, knowing that he had come from the Father and was returning to the Father, he took off his outer garment and he wrapped it around and grabbed a towel and began to wash the disciples' feet. He is the King of the universe, the creator of everything. So what gives him the ability to take off that cloak and put on the garments of a servant, the least of the position of that society? See, what gave him the ability to serve no matter what people thought? He knew who he was. He knew where he came from, where he was going. He knew what his purpose in life was. So it didn't matter what anybody thought. If we, as women, don't understand where our value comes from, then we're always going to be fighting. We're always going to be struggling with that. But if I know that I'm a daughter of the King, he defines me, and if I embrace what he says about me as a woman, then you see, then I can begin to say, how do I need to order my world? Because my interior world needs to be ordered by Jesus Christ first. If my interior world is dependent on the exterior world around me, I'm always going to be in flux.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
But if my interior world is settled in Jesus Christ, then I have the ability to know how to order my exterior world. Mm-hmm. And it will reflect itself in relationships, because, Carla, we have to always ask the question, how am I doing with my relationships? What is my attitude like towards my husband, towards my children, and then towards those that I work with and those that are outside of my sphere of my house, my home? So, it's that attitude that I've got to watch. And that's an attitude that I've had to really work on, because I can either see myself as a helpmate and realize the blessing and the richness that God gave me to be able to move out into my world to support Waldy, or I can hold that against him the rest of my life to say, well, you got to go on and you got to do this, and I was left behind.
Right.
And I had someone say that to me. I've had different ones say, what's in it for you, Sharon?
Right.
If you go and he does his schooling and he gets to do this, what do you get out of it? Do you see where the competition and the tension is there?
And sometimes it's so subtle, isn't it? Like, people just say something and you're like, oh, like, it just puts your head somewhere. You're like, I don't want to be thinking about that. But it's just like the way they say it, you're like, man, like, you're purposely trying to like pit me against my husband, or you're purposely trying to make me look down on that other lady for the way she's structuring her life, right? And it can be subtle, but man, it can be powerful.
But you see, you also see that it's coming from their world and what they've experienced.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So you have to always take into consideration and be kind, because some of these people have come from a place where they felt like there was no appreciation, or the woman saw it as just a subservient role rather than a privilege. And here's the thing. When we talked last time, we talked about the fact that a marriage is to reflect the Trinity. And the Trinity, each of them has a very different, distinct role. Some of them overlapped somewhat, but they had a common goal and purpose. Waldy and I had a common goal and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So as a husband and wife, do you have a common goal and purpose? Like, do you want your lives to have an influence and impact where you join forces, or are you in opposition as to who's more important?
Right.
And because who's more important depends then on who has to clean the toilets when you get home.
Right. Right.
Because I make more money. You see where that becomes then a bone of contention that doesn't need to be there. But if we're not settled about what is it that we are trying to accomplish as a couple and as individuals and what we bring together.
Mm-hmm.
Because Waldy by himself would, it's like he understood the sacrifice I had to make.
Mm-hmm.
And there were things, I think just being a woman means we have to embrace limitations. So Carla, when you talk about being a mom and being a businesswoman, you have to embrace limitations because our world says that we need to be superwoman. We have to do it all, have it all, and do it with a smile on our face.
And do it with a perfect body too. Gotta add that.
Yeah. Well, and to show and to have a home and children and everything that shows that I've been successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
See, again, looking at where my value comes from is from all the external, which we're finding as we go through COVID and the recession can be taken like that.
Yeah.
So is my world gone then if all those things are lost? Or do I have an anchor inside that is me, whether I'm put in prison or I'm free to move in my world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You see, this is why it's so important for us to become women of integrity and to know where our value comes from.
Mm-hmm.
The Proverbs 31 woman, one of the things that you notice about her is she is not idle.
Yeah, she's super busy.
But she's not self-seeking.
Right.
She's not in it for her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I had to realize is that I had to keep that in my mind because I had the opportunity to stay in Dallas and to go big.
Mm-hmm.
But Waldy and I had a greater purpose that was going to take us probably beyond the Dallas vicinity because we wanted to do ministry, which was not going to bring in a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And it meant me leaving a status and a position where I was known and where my network was huge
Mm-hmm.
to going to a very small community in the North where nobody knew who I was or what I had done.
Right.
And it really didn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. But if I don't know who I am, then I can crave that. But you got to know who I am. I mean, if you really knew what I did and the position and the money I made and all that, see, but is that really what it was all about?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very wise person say to me, just remember that when you're there, what your purpose is and why you're there, what your purpose is beyond it. So Carla, when you're doing a business, when you have a home, you have to be able to say, what are the things that are limitations that I have to embrace so that I can keep a good focus
Mm-hmm.
and not lose disequilibrium? So yes, I worked and yes, I had a family, but then I had to say, then that means I'm not involved in all these other things that are good things
Right.
and fun things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have little children, they need me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some things that only a mom can bring, not a nanny,
Mm-hmm.
not even a dad sometimes. Not that the dad can't bring lots to the table, but there's sometimes the kids just want mom.
Right. Yeah.
And so you've got to know that there are seasons in my life, and am I willing to embrace that and go, I mean, because there were some great things. I mean, there were some opportunities there that I would have loved to have done, but it was like, no, if I say my children are important to me, then how does my life show that?
Right. Yeah.
What am I doing as a woman to show that I really do care? Now, was I successful completely in this? No. It was not an easy journey. But, to be able to take the time to listen to your children, who tucks them in and hears their heartache and their griefs, who prays with them when they're stressed, and do they sense that I have time to hear their heart? Because that's what a woman brings. To be the barometer in the home, to be able to be attentive to be attuned and to provide that structure. So I can't be so concerned about me establishing my name that I forget that I also chose to have children.
Right. Yeah.
And so integrity, to be a woman of integrity, means that we meet the demands of reality. So if I chose to be a mother first, then I need to make sure my children, no one else is going to be given an account to God for them. I will be, me and Walton.
Mm-hmm.
So while I have the opportunity to do those things, I need to make sure I'm not neglecting my kids at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know what's interesting, Carla?
Mm-hmm.
There's a study that's just been done what's the impact of COVID-19, the recession, and on teenagers. So what's the recession and the COVID-19 effects been on women in particular? Okay. So what they're finding is that with the losses of jobs and having to go home, a lot of women are the ones, because childcare was shut down, women are the ones that ended up needing to go back into the home, letting go of their jobs, some of them because they couldn't do from home, or both of them trying to work at home and they couldn't do it, plus have kids at home and school them.
Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting is they're finding the kids are more settled. Teenagers are talking to their parents more. There's less anxiety and depression, and they're eating more meals together.
Yeah. There's the silver lining in this all, right?
Well, there can be if we embrace that. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean that there aren't things we need to do to ensure that the family, but we need to keep the family in mind, not just the woman, the family in mind. What's good for the family is good for society. Right. And that's what we're up against today, is how society wants to destroy the nucleus of the family and what it represents, because they think it's a misrepresentation somehow for women. But again, that depends on how you define it, a woman, and where her value comes from.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm really glad you said that. I was thinking too, like, we can't go all into this, but like, I'm thinking of teen girls in particular, right? Because when you're older, things are, you're less pressured, right? You're a little bit more confident in who you are. It's sort of like when I had my first kid and I don't know how to do this, and everyone's probably looking at me, and I don't know how to bath them properly. Am I doing everything right? And then you have second and third, pretty soon you're just like, I got this. And I think that's more, but when you're a teenage girl, like, to just kind of know where you're at. I mean, I think our culture kind of says that, if you're a woman, especially a teenage girl, like, flaunt your body and be powerful and be the popular one. And like, there's so much pressure right around that. What would you say to teen girls, or someone who has a teen girl? Is there anything that we can do to kind of help these? And I mean, I have a teenager daughter too, but like, what can we do to help them in this kind of culture that we live in? What would you say to that?
Well, you know what? I think the first thing I would say is look at their mothers.
Mm-hmm.
We really model for our daughters what we believe about being a woman and what she will believe about being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Because if, and I guess I see that in how we can tell them that everything about your value is based on your body, by either the fact that we're constantly dieting, we're constantly talking about our weight, we're constantly talking about, the exercises and things we need to do in order to look good, as if our only value comes from the external.
Mm-hmm.
So again, no different than being a woman, a young girl, you have to really ask and wonder, how has she come to believe, or what has she come to believe her value is? Is it only her body?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it that she brings something so much more to the world than her body?
Mm-hmm.
And how did she come to understand that? Through culture and through the story.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that, we see is that a woman's body, and women come to understand this early on based upon some of the experiences that they might have had, is that their body has a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And women use their bodies to wield power. And so you have to kind of, again, see, do they understand their own agency? So that's where it's like, when a girl is wanting to wear very seductive clothes, you have to wonder, what is she really desiring? What is she longing for?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of us, whether it's through seductive clothing, whether it's through conduct or the way we present ourselves, a lot of times we're presenting a desire that's deep within us for something that we have not really named. Mm-hmm. So again, and maybe it's that I feel I want to belong. And so the only way to belong, or I want to be noticed, I want to be seen. So when we want to be seen, what's sad is when we only want the eyes of other people, because it's not just men's eyes. Mm-hmm. Women look at other women's bodies, and we're assessing each other all the time. Let's face it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we want people's eyes to look at our body, but not our face, then you have to kind of go, what's going on inside? Mm-hmm. You have to ask those questions and be kind to say, I wonder what her story is, rather than I'm feeling threatened because she's now going to be tempting my husband or my teenage boys.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Do you see the difference? Mm-hmm. So that's where we need to be really kind to our young girls to say, what impression have we given them that their body is the epitome of their value. Mm-hmm. So can we build into them? And this is where, Paul in the Bible, he understands that women are in very difficult situations and that we've experienced some tough things. And some of us have experienced abuse of our bodies, where things were taken from us. Mm-hmm. And so that causes us sometimes to curse our bodies. And I know the journey for myself in that area. And I've worked with young women who have had sexual abuse. And so they use their bodies to try to bring men down, because when they felt that they were powerless and their bodies were used against them and they didn't have a choice, now they want to use their body to control men and drive men crazy. So you see, there's an internal war. So there can be some real pain and heartache that a woman needs to work through and look at, how have I cursed my body? And who owns my body? Is it the voices of others that have abused me or have touched me in inappropriate ways? Or have I brought my body back under submission to God to say, God, you created my body, and this is the body that you have given me, and I'm only going to give you authority over my body. Mm-hmm. And so then I have that freedom to begin to present my body in a way that reflects that internal value that God has given me. Mm-hmm. So there's so much behind that question.
Carla, there's so much. I know. Yeah. Like, as you're talking, I'm like, man, like we could really delve deep, but I appreciate how, like, even though I'm giving you some really big questions, you're doing your best to answer them in a concise way, because we could go on and on and on. Right. So one more question, or did you have anything more that you wanted to add about that, Sharon?
No, that is great. There's, like you said, we could go on and on, but I think we're getting a picture, because if I can stress anything, women need to be kind. Mm-hmm. We need to be kind to each other. We need older women who have learned and have been trained and taught to be able to help younger women. We need to mentor them, not look at them and criticize them, mm-hmm. but walk with them, help them reach their fullest potential. I think we have so much to bring, mm-hmm. Carla. We do, but we need to help each other, not tear each other down. Mm-hmm. Support each other, because we will, in the stresses of life, we're going to turn to all sorts of things to try to get some sort of self-soothing. And we may turn to things that are not good. Mm-hmm. And that's where we as women can help each other to go, rather than turning to these vices, how do we turn to Jesus Christ, who is our source for life? Mm-hmm. How do we turn to other women and know how to go to other women to get the right support to say, help me get equilibrium again, because right now I'm thrown off. And not look at them as if they're crazy or as if I never had that issue. I had that lots. And I'm so grateful for women that I could look to that went ahead of me, that I could go, okay, there's a woman that's on purpose, that gives me that point of saying, no, Sharon, stay with it. I don't need to go on either side of this craziness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. What about we don't have to get into feminism too much, because that's like a whole different ball of wax. But would you say when I'm talking about feminists, I'm talking about radical feminists, okay? So the feminists that are just like, yeah, like I am woman, hear me roar, we don't need men, that whole thing. Are radical feminists really the free women here? Because it's all about, we want our freedom. Are they the free women? Like, what can you just say about that particular question, Sharon?
Yeah. Well, because it's such a loaded question, I'm going to give you just a little snippet here, because that is so involved. Again, I'm going to come back to the question, radical feminists, really the free women. I always want us to look at the assumptions with questions, right?
Right.
So if you're not associated with the radical feminists, you're not free.
Right.
You see where we can think, unless I'm this, I'm not really free.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. Okay, because again, you are a slave to something. So even radical feminists who are fighting for freedom can be a slave to an ideology and not be really free inside. Or I can be free inside because I know where my value comes from. And from that freedom, move into my world to see where things may be politically or those that are being marginalized and hurt need some assistance. But not from a sense of, this isn't fair, and unless I have the same as a man or whatever, then I'm not free. Where does my freedom come from? Is it something that is internal, or is it something that I've given power to that's outside of my control that I'm always fighting against?
Right. Yeah.
If I'm free inside, I can be in prison and be free.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. So true. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. So, okay, well, we'll move on from that one, because I know we had talked before and we had said that we could do like a whole podcast, well, probably 5 podcasts just on that one question. But I appreciate that you try to be succinct here, because we don't want to take up too much time. So maybe this question, it kind of ties in, but like, are women victorious? Should we be fighting for our rights? So are we victorious, or should we be always kind of fighting for our rights? Because there is that, and that's like in feminism, that's just in general, like whether you identify as a feminist or not, like, do we need to fight for any kind of rights that we have? Like, what would you say about that?
Okay, I'm going to come back to something again, very basic, back to the very beginning.
Okay.
Where did our human rights come from?
From God.
It came right from the very beginning in creation. He created us, male and female, in the image of God. So again, let's go back to, where do my rights come from as a person, as an individual? And then from that, then let's be really sure that we're looking at a balance, because sometimes what is my right means it's not going to be the right of somebody else. Who is really the one who is being hurt? Because for some to have rights mean others don't. So in our world where we push a woman's right to have abortions, means we don't give the unborn child a right who has no voice. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about. So we have to look at, when we look at rights, what are we believing about rights? Because even, when a woman says, well, a woman needs to have rights, she needs to be able to do all this, that, and the next thing. Does every man have those rights? No. Even certain positions in the church or in other positions, does every man have those positions? No. So sometimes we look at things as if we're somehow being gypped, rather than embracing what all we do have. It reminds me really of the garden, because they had every fruit bearing tree was theirs to enjoy. There was one stinking tree in the garden that wasn't theirs to enjoy. Where was she huddled? Around the one tree. Right? Rather than going, God has given me a huge scope of making a mark on my world. And if women understood, she who rocks the cradle rocks the world.
Mm-hmm.
A woman of great character influences the man that goes into certain places.
Mm-hmm.
If she's a woman of integrity, he will listen to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she can have influence. So there may be a place for her to look at what are ways in which people are not being dealt with properly. But we might be called upon to be more like Mother Teresa. She had a tremendous movement, but it wasn't through politics.
Mm-hmm.
She was hands-on. She just went about and did something about those that were dying that no one cared about. See, do I need to do it? See, what's my platform? So if God has given you that platform, because like Esther, for such a time as this, God may call upon some women for that, but most women are not going to be in those positions, just like most men aren't.
Mm-hmm.
But there are going to be those places in our sphere of influence that I can bring good. Am I willing to do it and not be self-centered and get my hands dirty for the sake of others?
Right.
But not because it's something I've got to try to fix inside of me, but because I know the value of both myself and the value of those outside there, and I want to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a really good perspective, going back right to the garden and, rather than, what are my rights? What am I missing here? It's like, what do you already have? And I mean, so much practice, like even in the secular world, about gratitude journals and being thankful for these things. And I mean, in the Bible too, like in 1 Thessalonians, it talks about, what does it say? Rejoice, always give thanks in all circumstances, right? Like,
yeah.
So we're called to do that. And I think that's such a good reminder. And really, a lot of the things that we're talking about, Sharon, it's really paralleling this whole COVID thing too, isn't it? Like, like about people's rights and about different perspectives and about like all of this stuff and like just really knowing who you are. And like, yeah, there's a lot of parallels there. So as you're talking, I'm kind of like, that's kind of what's going in my head, just because we just recently had these new COVID restrictions, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like that stirs up a lot of stuff.
It sure does.
Yeah. So one more thing I want to ask you is, how can women, and this is, kind of another loaded question, but another one that, do your best to answer in a short amount of time, I guess. But how can women find contentment, satisfaction, and their place in such a contentious society? And of course, we've already touched on a lot of this, but how would you answer that particular question? Because it is quite a contentious society. We talked about, women judging each other. We talked about fighting for our rights. We talked about, like just what the whole feminist movement can bring and all of that. But how do you find that contentment and satisfaction so that you're not always fighting, so that you're not always feeling lesser than? How do we get there, Sharon?
Yeah, you know what? And again, I'm going to take us back to our interior world.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important for us to look at, what do I believe? So in that, whose voice do I listen to? And I'm always having to come back to that, because there's a side of me that wants to fulfill my own desires, to be self-centered. But it's like, I have to look at, who is my source of life? Where does the source of life come from? So whose voice do I listen to? It's going to be really important.
Mm-hmm.
And where do we go for truth? Is truth something, whatever I believe truth is, or is truth out there that God has put principles and things in place that don't change?
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on where I go for truth as to where I'm going to find contentment, or what I believe, where contentment comes from. James chapter 4 says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Do they not come from your desires that wage war within you? You want something, but you don't get it. You kill and covet. You cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. And when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your own pleasures. So there's that sense of fighting, that contentiousness like you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And he says it comes from our desires that wage war within us. And so there's always the messages that are coming at us as women in the marketing world and from people around us, significant others that are saying things to us about where contentment's going to be found. Mm-hmm. In your body size, in how much money you make, how beautiful you look, and all those things. So it's like, where does contentment come from? And, I think we have to identify where our source of life is. And I'm fascinated with the story of Jesus. And I think we can kind of bring this to a culmination with what Jesus did with the woman at the well. Mm-hmm. And I love how there's 3 in particular women stories that Jesus are included in the Bible, mm-hmm. which I think is so great. Mm-hmm. So when you think of the woman at the well, she probably was a beautiful woman. Who do you think had an issue with her?
Probably a lot of the women, maybe jealousy or whatever.
Yeah. How do we know that there were women that were probably very jealous of her?
Well, she was going to the well by herself.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. So she's not some kind of bimbo, because she's been married 5 times. Mm-hmm. The men like her. The women are threatened. Mm-hmm. So there's something about this woman that is appealing, mm-hmm. right? So she's been married 5 times and she's living with another man. But when she meets Jesus, when Jesus meets her at the well, he asks her a very important question when he says, go get your husband. And she says, I don't have one. And his whole point, because he says, if you knew who it was who asked you for water, you would be asking me, and I would give you the spring of living water that would never go dry. And she says, I want that. See, she's thirsty. And Carla, every woman is thirsty. Every woman is hungry. What do we fill our hunger with? What do we fill our thirst with? Do we go to drugs? Do we go to alcohol? Do we go to medications? Do we go to fitness? Do we go to work? Do we go to the spas and salons and all those things? So Jesus was pointing out to her where she thought her source of life would be, and that was men. Mm-hmm. So for each woman, she has to say, what does she believe her source of life is? And Jesus is saying, you can go there, but is it bringing you what you've been looking for? And it's like, how's that working for you? Not too good, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but he says, if you want me, then you need to come to me in spirit and in truth. Be honest. I don't have within myself what I need to find life. I need to be able to embrace it and receive it from God, who gives me life. And when I do that, he becomes my source of life, which never goes dry. So I can either turn to a broken cistern, or I can turn to Jesus Christ as a child of God, a daughter of the King, and know that he will source me. And his resources, Carla, are endless. Mm-hmm. That's going to bring contentment. And it brings a settledness to the woman's soul, who then brings settledness to her home. And then she can then run her home and everything around her with much greater wisdom, because she's going to be looking to the source of life for help. Mm-hmm. Source of life for help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. And I catch myself so often, Sharon, going to those, he talks in the Bible, the broken cistern, right? You could call it the broken mm-hmm. cup, the broken basket, or the broken container. The pail, you're trying to carry a 5-gallon bucket, you notice there's a crack in it, there's water spilling everywhere. And, it's like, it's never gonna work. But yeah, there's so many things that we can go to that are not going to satisfy. And the world is going to just throw them right in your face and tell you they will.
Absolutely.
If you get in awesome shape, then you'll be happy and everybody will love you and your family. If you drink this type of alcohol, everyone will be happy. If you, right? Like, the way the ads, absolutely. They feed right into your emotions too, right? So they're powerful. Absolutely. And I just feel like, man, like if that's a lesson for us to know, even if it seems good in the moment for a time, it's a broken cistern. You're gonna feel empty. You're gonna need to go back and go back and go back. But it's like,
Absolutely.
Jesus Christ, that is where your satisfaction comes from. And if you find it anywhere else or try to find it anywhere else, you're going to be like that woman on the well who just has to keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming, never feels satisfied. And all the hurt and damage that she would have experienced from all these different men, right? And these women that don't even want to go haul water with her, like how isolated she's become, right? And how thirsty she was. And yet how Jesus reached out to that woman. And in that culture, like, and maybe, that was a huge thing, because a lot of people say, Christians, like they're not good to women. Well, if Jesus, like, women were treated horribly. When Jesus came in and reached out to someone like the woman in the well, or the woman that had hemorrhage, and like all these different women, and some of them were like, the prostitute, right, that was crying and at Jesus' feet. And I think like all these women that he reached out to, and like how crazy that would have been for them, and yet how loved they would have finally felt, because they would have had that craving, they would have had that thirst, and oh my goodness, like somebody notices me. Jesus notices the women, and not only does he notice them, but he gives them a purpose, and he gives them so much value and worth.
Yeah, he states their dignity. And so we feel lonely because we don't feel attached. We feel uncared for. We feel uncherished. And in our loneliness, we seek to fill that loneliness with other things. And Jesus fills that loneliness. He comes back to them to say, you do belong. You are a daughter. And I see you, and I see great value, and I give you life. Like, that's the beauty of it. He never tears them down. He elevates them to the position that he always meant for them to have.
Yes.
So in our loneliness, in our emptiness, he's our source to go to.
Yes.
And that's where we're going to find contentment.
Yes. Absolutely. And such a good reminder. I have to keep reminding myself that, like, every single day, like the song that says, like, it's talking about God. It says, I need thee every hour. I'm like, no, I need thee every second. Like, I need God like every second, because how quickly, how prone I am to wander and like get caught up in the things of the world, and how quickly we realize, okay, this doesn't satisfy. Why am I here again? So
that's right. Oh, so true.
Yeah.
So true, Carla. So true, hon.
And so many things that you've told me, Sharon, is like being kind, right? Like being kind to each other, but being kind to yourself too, and understanding, like, how would Jesus view you, right? He's not there, like it says, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So even when you've failed, maybe you've gone to all these different sources, and you have just, a whole bunch of baggage and luggage that you're packing around that's just causing you to get like just so down, and you're so, critical of yourself and shameful and whatever. It's just like, there is no condemnation. God is not here to judge you. He's here to save you. He is not here for, the healthy. He is here for the sick, right? And I think that's what people have to remember. And I think the church, a lot of people have baggage around the church, and maybe hasn't, it obviously has not done a great job of that. But you have to understand that the church is a bunch of fallible people. The church is not Christ himself. It is to represent Christ, but it is not Christ himself. So just like you fail, so does the church, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, just that message that, like, doesn't matter what you've gone through, God is there. Jesus is there for you.
Amen. Amen. Well, and if each woman would be willing to look inside and be kind, to say, what do I believe? How did I come to that conclusion? And is this who I want to be? Do I want to be this type of woman? And are these things really satisfying me? So that, but it takes being willing to take some time and looking what's going on inside, and then reaching out to get some help, so that we can become and support each other, become the women that God intended us to be, that brings life to those around us.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to end there, Sharon. I could keep talking to you, but I just appreciate everything that you shared so much. And I my prayer is really that this message will really touch the hearts of some women that are struggling with their identity, maybe with their relationship with God, not knowing maybe where to turn to get that, they just have all these empty cisterns. Where do you get that cistern that's not cracked? Where do you get that source, that fulfillment from? And it's really only found in Christ. And and I can attest to that too, because I've also looked very many places for it, and you always come up empty, right? We always come up empty. Yep. So, yeah. So anyways, thank you so much, Sharon.
You're welcome. And God bless you in your work.
Thank you. You too, Sharon.
This episode is brought to you by my company, Power Fitness Online. We are a tight-knit fitness community, and we guide you every step of the way to get fit and stay fit through our live workouts, nutrition coaching, and incredible support team. Go to powerfitnessedson.com to learn more. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please leave a positive review on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I would love to see your comments. I would love to know what you think about this episode and interact with you. I love hearing from you. Once again, I'm Carla Rand, and this is The Carla Rand Show, and I can't wait to see you next week for our next episode.